I mean, it went quite well. I think there were about, what, 50 people
Yeah,
turned up.
so, yeah.
A lot were ex-Labour Party members, but there were a lot of optimism about a new party launching, about people feeling finally they've got a political home potentially to go to. So it was good. It were enthusiastic, and people are just wanting the party to get set up, and so people can crack on leafleting, canvassing, and maybe contesting next year's local elections as well. I think people are pretty eager. For me, it's economic issues. Has to be affordable housing, has to be a cornerstone. And in my view, it's not just third party social housing providers. We have to equip councils with the cash to build council housing. That is a big issue. It's about addressing other cost of living factors as well, such as energy prices, significant cost to people's incomes. So I think if we're going to be a serious party and going to challenge sort of everybody's economic struggles, I think that's what we need to focus on. I think for places like Wakefield, where there's high levels of deprivation and poverty, that has to be crucial. We can't just go on business as usual with sort of neoliberal sort of market force sort of solutions. We have to deliver fundamental change.
The proof there, it doesn't work, does it? Council housing, it worked. The economic argument for it stands as well. Go back to 1948 and the 50s. It creates employment, it stimulates the economy, it houses people, it's affordable. It just makes a massive difference. And I think I would add to that, public transport's a big issue around here as well. The buses are atrocious. So we need to address those issues, really, and I think people respond to that.
Just to add, like, public transport is a big factor. We're dominated by Arriva across the Wakefield district, and they scored in a customer satisfaction survey. Like, they came out the worst provider in all of England. And there's there's a lot of gaps in sort of bus service provision, where there's places like Hemsworth and Stamsward, South Hempsall and Kirby can be left without the main direct bus line for like 2 or 3 hours on an evening. But hopefully that will be getting rectified as things go forward. The West Yorkshire Mayor decided to introduce bus franchising, so hopefully that will soon have some sort of improvements. But I'm not hopeful because she's already delayed it, implementing it once. And we never know, it might end up getting delayed more. But I think municipal bus ownership needs to be a factor in the new party as well. We should be owning these services, providing public services owned by local authorities, democratically controlled, so passengers and workers have an input into that. That's the only way we're going to improve things. And particularly on Arriva, no matter what tinkering we do around the edges with bus franchising, the core issue is generally poor wages, poor conditions, such as poor pensions and working time sort of rules and stuff. And toxic management's a significant factor as well in Arriva, so we need to address those as well.
Jake and myself, we've got experience. I worked for the bus companies when it was nationally owned, not strictly nationally owned, but it was controlled by, I think the government was the biggest shareholder. And I worked for both local companies, and it was just far better, more reliable, cheap fares, and it was the council's South Yorkshire Passenger Transport Executive was the best. They subsidised it. It brought people into the cities. It generated the economy, and it just has to be. Franchising alleviates the current situation, but it's not the answer.
Nationalisation, I think, definitely in terms of like railways and things like that. Buses, I think we need to be a little bit different. I think not nationalisation in terms of the Whitehall basically owning and running them. I think they need to go back to some sort of localised model where, whether they're done under the combined authorities or by councils themselves or something, but there needs to be that local element, and there definitely needs to be the place for trade unions and workers to have a voice in the operation of those services, and definitely passengers. And there definitely needs to be something about accessibility as well, people with disabilities, wheelchairs and things like that, about how they access the bus network and the broader transport system in general as well.
But I would say, when you talk about nationalisation, the utilities, electric, gas, water, all that needs to be brought back into public ownership.
Yeah.
Council housing, definitely, that's my top priority.
Yeah, it is for me as well. And it needs democratic control, these services as well. What we've seen with outsourcing and things is sort of, as public officials, we're lumbered with the duties of providing these services, but we have no real control over them. We have no real influence because we've outsourced everything as well. So that limits our ability to bring change in. And it does raise a question of what's really the point in having us if we can't really, affect any change because we've outsourced everything. So it goes to the heart of democracy, really. We just need cash. That's it. I mean, I think Wakefield's lost about 50% of its grant funding from central government over the last 15 years, and so that seriously impacts, what we're able to do. But they do keep shoveling extra duties and responsibilities on councils, but the cash doesn't come with it. We've still got to make do. I mean, we get little bits of grant funding, like you can have 15 million to build, a new library we've already got and things like that. But it is cash. But I think we need to look at how councils can raise money themselves as well, because if we carry on going down this model where we're giving a lot of us business rates to central government, which should have been getting distributed, but they've been cutting it. We're just going to end up in another position, maybe 10, 20, 30 years down the line, if another Tory government or Reform government gets in. So I think there needs to be significant changes to council tax, whether we bring in a new system, whether it's based on land value and things like that. And we do need to be raising, collecting and keeping the taxes as well, locally.
This council tax system was brought in because of the failure of the poll tax, and it was ill thought out, and it's never been altered or looked at properly since then, has it? It's a very unfair system.
With austerity, I think there's some stuff councils do which don't always make sense as well. Like Wakefield's outsourced a lot of services which don't always make sense. I think the motion we brought yesterday were challenging the outsourcing, because over the last 9 years we've spent about 149 million on outsourcing, and we've simply asked for a review of all those services that are run by private companies to see whether it's actually cheaper to do it that way or bring it back in-house. If we were to bring it back in-house, is there anything we could generate income from to subsidise that cost, similar to how like the DLOs and stuff used to work? We do something like that with the bins already. So we raise revenue through collecting commercial waste and stuff from businesses. So there's all that angle as well, that councils, I think they just need to be aware of the spending as well, because we're all right cutting services, cutting staff and raising council tax every year, but we need to be asking the question, can we afford these outsourcing? So a little bit of background: in 2016, the council outsourced their facilities management services to NG. Now, there were issues with that contract, and before I was a councillor, I was chair of the district Labour Party, and I'd met with the leadership a few times to bring these services back in-house, but they ended up just going with another contractor. The problems persist around service delivery and whether it's value for money and control over the services, but what they're doing is, instead of going to one contractor, they're appointing a managing agent to break the services down into smaller bits and award them to different companies. Now, if outsourcing isn't working under a principal contractor scheme where one company is, doing all the services, I fail to see how it's going to improve when it's still outsourcing at the end of the day. We're just fudging the services around to different companies. But we seem to have a bit of an outsourcing by default sort of mindset in the council. And when I was looking at the Robertson's contract before they decided to go down this new route, nobody had done any detailed financial work, any impact assessments, any full options appraisal, no cost benefit analysis, just nothing at all. So the question is, how do you know this is the right decision for the council? And I think when we look at what they've done in this one contract, it's not a leap to suggest this is how they operate normally across, all those outsourcing arrangements. So I think definitely it needs looking at across the council. There's definitely some element of wasted money.
I mean, I was ready for packing it all in earlier this year, and I think Jake was the same, and so were a few more. But because I learned since I got elected, and probably before then, because I was on the district Labour Party, that councillors don't want to put any effort into this. They don't want to scrutinise. The full-time employees, the civil servants, they will do as little as possible. And if nobody kicks up a fuss, they're quite happy to just go along with it, So councillors don't really get involved. We've got no power anyway. We can only ask questions. And they don't like giving us answers anyway. But yeah, it's a massive problem. It's the culture that's developed over the years. It must be right. If the full-time officials say this, then it must be right, and there just is no scrutiny. These scrutiny committees and cabinet meetings, nobody asks awkward questions. I don't know why that is, but I had a conversation with Denise only the other day because she didn't like the motion that I'd put forward, although she decided to accept it. And I said to her, for years now, decades, if you got selected as a candidate in the Labour Party, you were guaranteed to get elected. That attracted the wrong kind of people. They joined the Labour Party just to become councillors, for whatever it satisfies their ego, they like the allowances or anything. And that's all they've got left with now, because there's only people that stick in and out. And you could see it in the chamber on Wednesday. The sheep just put their hand up, and because they're whipped to do it, And if they don't like the motion, they don't question it. If they can't, if there's no argument, valid argument, and they resort to personal attacks on you, and that's what we're faced with. It needs, well, I don't know what the outcome of the election next May is, but I can guarantee you that the Labour group will be a lot smaller than it is now. And our reform councillor won't be sat on his own either. I'm certain of that. And that's the challenge we've got to face next May. We need to be doing it now, which is hence this new party's got to get off the ground, hasn't it? And get organised and get its head together.
Yeah, so it's about the candidates political parties are putting forward. I think they need to be a bit more rigorous in who they're selecting rather than just accepting anybody. We need to go back to selecting people who are proven trade unionists, whether they're reps or they've been trade union activists campaigning on industrial matters. We need people who've been active in the community, whether it's running food banks, whether it's running a local sort of kids nursery group, or whether it's a litter picking group, or something like that. We need people who've proven themselves in wanting to deliver for the local community. But I think going back to internally within councils, I think some of it's due to how they're structured and the constitutional setup. So we put in this motion yesterday, we put something in where any significant changes, where it be the outsourcing of all services or something, should immediately be reported to a scrutiny committee, the relevant one, and that should be basically debated on. by that scrutiny committee. That ended up getting kicked out, but there is definitely an issue with how the councils operate in practice. The Labour Party was set up by the trade unions to represent workers, to represent working class communities and the issues they face, and that's definitely something the Labour Party is not doing under Starmer. We saw with the cuts to disability benefits. We saw the taking away of the winter fuel allowance and things like that, and basically the massive increases in defence spending. I mean, it's just the priorities are all wrong. We should be getting back to what do communities need, what services do people rely on, how can we improve them, and even on the industrial front, we've got this employment rights bill, but they are chipping away at it and removing, a lot of key provisions. If we end up with just full employment rights on day one, that would be better. That's better than the position we're in now. But we do need to go further. We need sectorial bargaining. We need mandatory recognition of trade unions. I think it's ridiculous that employers have the right to decide whether they recognise trade unions or not. So we need to be going further than what they're currently wanting. But they're the values this new party should be espousing. We should be getting back to the traditional values of sticking up for workers, sticking up for working class communities, looking after the poorest and most marginalised people in society, and that's what we need. We need a party that, at its heart, is going to seek to radically transform society and put wealth and power back into ordinary people, into the hands of ordinary people, and away from the millionaires and billionaires. That's what I'm looking for in this new party.
When I joined the party when Michael Foot was the leader in 1981, and was the Labour Party ever a good party? No, it wasn't. It was always a battle, and the left was at best tolerated. But it did achieve a lot of things, especially with trade union involvement. But we had full employment then, or not exactly after Jim Callaghan. I didn't rate him very highly, but I just the betrayal of Neil Kinnock and things like that, and all our things that we'd achieved in the 50s, 60s, and 70s were just eroded over the years. Blair didn't help, and explains the reason why Jeremy suffered so much. They certainly didn't like it, and they don't want to go back to that. But I mean, policies in the 80s, even the Tories thought nationalisation. They didn't mess with it until Thatcher, and that was moderate. Now it's extreme hard left policies, isn't it? It's ridiculous, and it's they would describe us as hard left. I'm not. I'm moderate. If there's a good idea, I don't care who came up with it. If it's a good idea, I'll run with it. Wherever it came from, it's just common sense, isn't it? The economic argument stacks up for what we've just described, and there should be core values: council houses, public transport, utilities. It just makes economic sense, whatever they say, And it's a fact. And I know John Trickett's a friend of ours, and he once sort of gave a lecture. And you look at the money that's been taken out of circulation, and you can see where it's all gone. The billionaires, there's more billionaires and millionaires now than ever, and that's where the money's gone, and it shows up. The statistics prove it. So it baffles me sometimes what people believe. The conversations we have when you meet the public and that, and that brings you into the media problem, isn't it? It's the mainstream media. The oligarchs own it. So how do we get our message across? It's difficult, isn't it? That's the real challenge. Education.
Sort of, I represent Hemsworth and Stan represents South Hempsall and South Kirby, which are sort of on the border with Barnsley. So it's about trying to get into communities outside Wakefield as well. It shouldn't be seen as a centralised sort of party only operating in sort of cities. It needs to be a lot broader than that.
Not London centric either.
They have been getting some strong votes in some areas, but I do think the scene is a bit more middle class. And I think obviously they're called the Green Party, so that puts the prominence on environmental climate change issues. But for a lot of working class people that I speak to, the tackling climate change is just an extra tax on them. It's an extra cost. It's an extra burden. Things, with congestion charges and stuff like that. And I think if they're going to be successful, I think they need to focus on policies which are going to improve people's sort of economic standing when it comes to climate change. I think that's what you need to merge. So things like with energy prices, why are energy prices so high when we've had a big expansion of renewable energy? Well, it's because prices are capped at the highest generated energy source, which is typically fossil fuels. So it's about breaking all that down as well.
It's the propaganda, isn't it? Like I said, if somebody's concerned about their energy bills, tell them they're doing good for the environment. Well, that don't pay the bill, does it? And
No.
don't put food on the table. That's what concerns them. That's. So I do think. I know a lot of the Green Party and they're nice people, but they don't understand that aspect of it. I don't think. The environment's an abstract thing to a lot of people, isn't it? They don't relate it to the problems that they've got.
We need to speak the language, just ordinary language of ordinary people. That's and just address the real issues. There's a lot of distractions at the minute, as well, whether it's with the flags and stuff like that. And we just need to focus, on the core priorities, cost of living, people needing a roof over their head, people in the late 20s, early 30s unable to move out of the parents' house because housing's so unaffordable. It's that stuff we just need to hammer on. We care about these issues. We're the only party come in. We're going to tackle, the real issues you face. That's what we care about. And, that's what we need to do.
Yeah, I talk to a lot. I live in a former mining village, and there's still a lot of ex-miners about, and that seems to be this. And all we've got is memories. But I do remember when I came out of the army. I got a council house, no problem. And I said, well, I got a mortgage from Wakefield Council, no deposit, and I bought my house under that scheme. We need to bring things like that back. But there was plenty of council housing, and even the lowest paid worker could afford to live without his wife going out to work. And there was no. You paid. I think I paid £90 a year rates. It's not relative. The cost of living was a lot less then, but that included water rates and everything. They brought all these separate issues out, that just ate away at people's income. And like I said, we talked about these workers' rights and units just being eroded, so people couldn't fight back. And we need to address those issues because that's what the real issues are. Like I said, there's no economic argument for what we're doing, unless you want to make the billionaires even richer. That's the only motive behind it, isn't it?
We need to focus on the policies and understanding we might not all agree, but at the end of the day, disagreements will be on how far we go on policies, probably. And I think as long as we're making good progress and we're putting policies out there, that will change things. I don't really see the need for us all to fall out.
I have discussed this with a lot of people, and we're still carrying the burden of experience being in the Labour Party, where you can't say anything, and disagreement becomes divisive, and it's okay to disagree. I don't think people have got that message yet. That it's fine. But some people see that it's falling apart and it's divisive. But you've got to speak your mind, and you've got to respect other people's opinions, and that's what needs to come back. We used to be able to, when they expelled me from the party, that was my response. I'm not going to be quiet. I'll say what I think. I've always been able to do that before. So just because Starmer wants me to be quiet, I ain't having it. So obviously I got expelled for that. But I think it's a principled stand. You've got to be prepared to do that.
Yeah, I think this idea of having a lottery to determine who goes to the inaugural conference, I'm seeing a lot of people criticising it, but I do think that's a good way to avoid the factionalism, because nobody's then basically ensuring certain people from certain wings are going to be getting on as delegates and stuff. I do think that's a good way to avoid the arguments. And especially, we haven't got any structures anyway. There's a bit of a chicken and egg scenario here, because can we send delegates when we haven't got a structure, but we need to go to the conference to agree the structure? So I do think the lottery is a good sort of initial workaround till we, formalise how this party is going to operate going forward. I'm not joining something that's a carbon copy of the Labour Party structures. I am not prepared to again go to like 4 or 5 different meetings a month at different levels of the local area where we're discussing the same issues with the same people. Whether it be a branch of CLP, a DLP, an executive. I am not interested in that. It needs to be a bit more of a nimbler organisation, a little bit more streamlined, where we have the place to have discussions in as local areas and determine things, but we need to be more of a campaigning force. That time we used to spend in the Labour Party having arguments with the same people could be spent engaging with the local community, doing people's forums or assemblies, whatever you want to call them, going out door knocking and canvassing, leafleting, whatever you want. I think that's what his focus should be on. So yeah, if it's just going to turn out to be a carbon copy, I've got no interest in that at all.
I would echo that, because they tended to be just echo chamber talking shops, places where good ideas just went to die. Nothing ever got done. And, the council's been the same. I've got red lines, but we'll have to see how it develops and trust that they sort it out. And in the meantime, we've just got to work locally, haven't we, grassroots, and try and get candidates and change people's minds.
Everybody just needs to pull together and make it work now. Neither of us have seen what's going off behind the scenes, and quite frankly, I don't really care. Right? If we're going to let egos or whatever else get in the way of this historic chance to set up an alternative, right, then those who are leading on it have failed us, basically. I really don't care who this he said, she said stuff. Just get on, get together, let's get it off the ground, and let's get out there winning elections and campaigning and winning hearts and minds. Let's start, delivering on the needs of the people of this country. Leave the egos, leave the factionalism at the door. I don't care about it. Let's just pull together and let's just get on. Let bygones be bygones at this point. Just let's crack on. That's it.
Yeah, I agree 100% with that. I mean, this is a lot bigger than Jeremy or Zara. I think it's going to happen. There'll be hiccups and humps to go over and hoops to jump through and all that, but I think we'll get there because there's just a massive support for it. I've said this to other people in other parties who've tried to bring their influence, like the swoopies and that. So if your argument was correct, you'd have 800,000 people joining up with you, wouldn't you? It's massive. So it'll get there. It's got to do. We've got to make it happen.
If we let this fail, we're just letting definitely the hundreds of thousands of people who signed up, but we're letting millions of people across the country who desperately need a new political vehicle to improve their lives down. And to be honest, if people let this fail, it'd be unforgivable. I'd never forgive them for it at all. So yeah, we just need to crack on.